Okay, so how to make precision surface flat plate. Now, just to clarify, this is nothing to do with ancient lost high technology directly, but it is let's just say a debunk in regards to what's often said to perfect flatness. So I'll show some examples of what happens when you actually have a surface plate, how you can test it without sophisticated modern machinery, and this will automatically exclude the Sakara Serapeum and so many of these other items as being precision, perfect, flat. But how to make these with essentially zero tools, only tools that you would be able to scrounge around in your backyard or in your local area. So it's basing it on the Whitworth free plate method. So I have two plates. These two are the same size, but I have a third one which is considered much larger. Okay, that's going to make it much more difficult, because if you're doing the Whitworth technique, it's best to have three plates of the same size and either circular or square. So these are rectangular and two of them the same size, the third isn't, but you can overcome this. But the basic technique. So I also have two sizes of abrasive. So basically I just grabbed some crushed up granite, crushed up quartz, crushed sandstone, poured it into a jar of water, stirred it up, let some settle. Well, I'll show you that in a moment. But even what I'm defining as a really coarse abrasive is it's dust. Okay, so that's what I when it comes to this will be coarse, and then I have this slightly finer material. There's still a bit of moisture in there, but this is when you get your sandpaper or your grit from the shop, they're going to have an exact size on it. But we don't have this. We just have to do it the simple way. So I'll place the video in the description. Firstly, how to get it relatively flat, which is very easy. It's basically rubbing two surfaces against one another. You're going to get it very close to flat. But now we want to create three almost scientifically laboratory flat surfaces. So just by rubbing these three against one another, we start to get to that, and that was by using a coarser abrasive. So you have to begin with a coarse and you work your way down. Now, without an engineering die, so it's another thing we have to work without. Well, that's where the different size courses, size of how thick your dust is, how big it is, and you can already start to see. Now, hopefully it will show. We can see if the light shows a little bit better. Okay, so if you notice, I have a area here. So this area is, well, noticeably darker than those, and we also have a dark spot in here. So this area has this lighter grey colour. Well, the lighter grey colour comes from the coarser abrasive. So it's like having a really rough sandpaper on a piece of wood. You can get the same effect, and when you go the finer the sandpaper, the smoother the wood is, but in this case it's stone. So this is a very coarse abrasive in this area, and this also tells me that this area is low. These areas are high. Okay, so that's without an engineering die. This is one way to do it. So the light grey is the thicker sand, the coarser sand. And this is also telling us where our low spots are, and the difference between that, essentially these are both just dust, okay, but we were able to grade them just by stirring them in water, pouring the top half out. So the difference in height between these high spots and these low spots is essentially the difference in the size of the dust. So this is very, very flat at the moment, but it's not precision flat. But this is the basic method that I'm using to find, when will my plate become flat, and eventually when it's all the same color or the same, there's even a difference in the, let's see if we can get the reflective angle. Okay, you can sort of also, if you, because even with this coarser abrasive, it's a mirror shine if you hold it at the right angle. Now, the better the polish is, eventually it'll be a reflection looking at it directly. But to start off with, is another way just to visually inspect it, is to look at the difference between the darker or the higher spots and the lower spots, and the mirror reflection in there. Okay, so that's the way that I'm finding my high and my low spots in there without engineering dye or an advanced tool. So like the other plate has the same thing, where I can see, again, it's lighter here in the middle. For reflection, I can also see a difference in there. So these two plates have basically a low spot in the middle. This one is starting to get a high spot right in the middle, so that's a good sign. And now it's the free plate technique. It's just A to B, B to C, C to A. The idea is that if you rub two things together, eventually one will become concave and the other one will become convex, or is it concave and so they'll be slightly, where is it? So if you just rub two plates together, eventually one will get a profile like this. That'll be one plate, and the plate on top, it's highly exaggerated, will have a bend in it. So with the free plate technique, by introducing the third plate, eventually, you're going to equalize these out. So eventually you'll get a perfectly flat plate. So you need at least three to do that, and that's the method of doing it. Having a few different sizes of abrasives, I've graded my abrasives into much more than this. This is just the beginning. So this is like the really coarse. This is really fine in reality, but this I'm defining as coarse. And then I'll get finer and finer and finer. So even these two steps are just the beginning. It's just a matter of repeating the process. Now the process itself is very simple. It's plate A. So okay, plate A, or plate 1, plate B, and this larger plate, which will be plate C. So just a routine going from one to the other, but there's also a technique in the way that you grind them against one another. So it makes for very slow video, but look, the essence of it is that, let's get that in the center. Okay, so I'm going to go from plate A to plate B. Okay, here for example, you can see when the stone is very rough compared to when you start, it's going to get darker and darker. But there are a few different I'll link some videos in the description, because people have different ideas on what's the best way. I can only show you the way that I used. I'll show these other plates I've already completed. These ones I'm recalibrating. But the essence is that first you need to count your strokes, and you need to have a pattern in the way that you do it. So I start with very small strokes, just one edge going over the other. That's the then, well, I could just write, but then it's the same in that direction. Okay, so I do like 20 in that way, 20 in that way, and then I rotate the stone and then repeat it. And again, just with very small, short strokes, because one of the things that's happening is that when one plate goes over the other, that means that this part of a plate is not getting abraded or sanded down, and the underside isn't either. So essentially what's happening is that the middle piece is getting all the attention all of the time, as where these outside ones are not. But that's not enough. I also mix it up a little bit, and so then I do longer strokes, both in the horizontal but also in the vertical. And I also rotate the stone so that any bias starts to get cancelled out. So again, middle strokes, in both directions. And then I also have large strokes, but I decrease the number that I have of these. So I do, that's how I would do in total, as an example, 60 small strokes, 40 medium strokes, and then 20 like large strokes. But at the same time, and this is one of the reasons why doing it by hand is still better, or at least equal to, machines can't really do it that well because they don't have a randomness in there, and that's one of so they polish mirrors, for the best mirrors for telescopes, and they still, most of the work is done by hand. So it's not just about the up and down. I'll also do small circular strokes, medium circular strokes, and large circular strokes, and that's because I want to catch the corners. Now I'll do a little bit in a moment, but there's also, when you get used to it, you can also hear it, and hopefully that'll be, but for instance, this corner up here might start to become higher, and as I'm grinding, I'll hear it like shh type of sound. I can hear that it's different when it's crossing that part again, which is telling me that this is higher and it needs more work. And so just by following the method, but by looking, by using the differences between the colour that the stone has, but also you can see it, you can hear it, basically you can feel it as well. And then there is the pattern of counting your stroke numbers to keep them equal, doing it in a rigid pattern, but also introducing a bit of randomness in there, and the random should be less than the rigid strict form of grinding. So those are the basic techniques, and let's get some abrasive. So that lighter grey colour, which was here in the centre, again, that comes from this coarser abrasive, and then we get to this thinner abrasive, which is still an early step. And let's get some on there. Also, mistakes I made earlier was putting too much abrasive on there. So to get these really fine adjustments, you only really have to use a very little bit, and not introduce too much abrasive too often, because if it'll clump. Even though it's like on a microscopic level, it might clump in certain places, which means a certain part's going to get worn down. We're trying to now get this flat to within microns, like in single-digit microns, and then even hopefully to be able to get it into a scale where we'll be measuring the difference in flatness in nanometers. And again, flatness is not smoothness. These are already incredibly smooth. Flatness is about, so how flat is it from this corner to this corner, that corner to that corner, across this axis, across, that's how they measure it. And it's very different from using a surface roughness indicator or a profilometer. Like literally nothing to do with it. Okay, so yeah, let's get a bit more water. At this point I'm using water. Later on, as I get into the really fine stuff, I'm going to be using oil. And again, just to spread that abrasive out as well, so that it's not clumped in one corner or on one spot, because now you only might be there for 20-30 seconds where this lump of abrasive is getting worked, but that might only be a couple of microns of effect, but that's going to affect the surface plate. We're talking high precision flatness, not pseudo flatness. Okay, so that's it there. I'm going to restart the camera. Okay, so now the basic technique of it. So as I said, I'm going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. Trying to keep the edges of the stone on there, because if you're a mill out there or the other side, that means again that part of the stone is not going to be getting worn down. So even with your strokes like that, I sort of move it from side to side ever so slightly, just to make sure that one edge is not getting worked more than the other. And okay, then usually, so I don't want to, because of the way the camera's set up, usually I will then rotate it 90 degrees and then do 20 strokes. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. And again, sort of moving a little bit back and forth to make sure that both edges of the stone are getting worked. And so these are small strokes. Then we rotate the stone and repeat the same thing again with the smaller strokes. Then I do the slightly larger, I'd call a medium, and just repeat that process again. And then I do half as many of these larger strokes, and again half as many of these. So again, lessening the number of strokes. So as I do these circular strokes, which are sort of a bit more random, which will give you a good effect as well, I do less of these, at least half as many as what I do with these more formal shorter strokes such as that. So count them, try and keep them. Again, always rotate the stone so that any bias on one side gets cancelled out on the other. And they're so flat already that if there's no way to explain it on the video, but if you get used to it, you'll realise that the amount of water will make it very sticky, and if you spin the stone too much, so if I rotate it, there's a good chance it's going to get stuck. And when I say stuck, you're going to have to smash it off with a piece of wood if you're not doing it properly. So generally it's better to pick up the stone, then turn it, because if you okay, 9 out of 10 times you won't have a problem, but on that 10th stroke the stone will get stuck like it's been glued on there. Okay, so there's the basics again. So I would do 20. Actually, let's say I'll do 4, just to make it a bit easier. I'll do 60 in this way, 60 in that way, rotate the stone, and I will do 40 of these larger strokes, and then 20 of the much larger, and then 20 of the circular ones. So we're going, keep going down, but it's these smaller strokes that I think are the most important ones, and always keep count of them, keep them equal, keep rotating around your position, so it's one direction to the other direction, spin the stone around, but even that's not enough, because if you're working from this position, if you're working from this side of the table, you'll tend to have more weight on the side that you're working from, so this far side is always going to have less weight, which means it's not getting pushed down, so it's not getting abraded down as much. So you want to rotate the stones, but also your position in relation to them, because whichever direction you're working from will have a slight bias and will affect it. So if you're always working from one side, it's much more work to try and counter those things out. So stone A to stone B, and then stone B to the much larger stone C. Ideally you would have 3 square or circular stones, but let's add a little bit of difficulty to there. So now we have this much larger stone. So when I go to stone B, and I haven't added the abrasive, but I just want to show the method. Again, I'm doing the same principle. So I go just to the edge. I do that the same at so horizontal or vertical. I repeat it now because there's no abrasive or water in there. It's a bit sticky. Okay, so yeah, it would be the same, even though it's larger, at the same, I'm working it from edge to edge, going over just a little bit, but I do the same in the opposite way. Let's get water that in camera. And then I also do larger sweeping grinds, and again, always keeping account of them, but the smaller strokes are the most important, I believe. We halve each time to these larger strokes, but then also introduce large circular ones. And that's where you'll really start to hear. So for instance, if this corner is a little bit higher, I'll hear I'll hear a different sound, like a more of a scraping sort of sound. And that tells me again that piece is higher. It might be the stone on top or the stone on bottom, but the whole method of it, the whole purpose of it is that two stones against one another will create relatively flat but not perfectly flat. If you do a third stone in there, it'll bring that to high precision laboratory flatness. So let's just do it. Okay, so a few minutes in, roughly 2-3 minutes, stone A to B, then B to C, then C to A. So go back to A, and originally it was even with the camera and just this poor lighting I've got, it was a noticeable light grey area or a low area there, and it's not as evident anymore, even if I okay, so you might notice, so these crystals or the smaller pieces, you can see that they, even the way they reflect, and then we get up to a line again about here, and it's moving here, so I still have now they nicely polished there, so there's still a area. Got to be careful that this doesn't take on another shape, but we still have like a low area which is there. Now this stone, just by, it is so smooth, by feeling it's not even worth putting a straight edge against it and shining a light. This is really flat, but we want to get precision flat, so we still have, maybe the light doesn't show up, it's hard for me to tell that this is a little bit lighter grey, but it's darkening up. So we're starting to get a high precision flat surface. The ultimate test will be, does it float? And we'll get to there eventually. Shown that in other examples. I've used this stone before, but I'm trying to get it at a higher level. But that floating test is the other one. So now we're getting closer and closer. So the low spot is getting smaller, and when you use stone A to B and B to C, C to A, or Whitworth free plate technique, it just has to equal out. That's just why it's such a good method to use. So very simple technique, and let's just keep going. Okay, so the plates went through like plate A to B, B to C, and then C to A. And just to look at the difference now, it's getting a bit hard to notice the difference between the shades of grey that comes from the different courses, but I still see like a lower area here and sort of more noticeable lower area there. Now a better way, as it starts getting more and more flat, is to use a reflection. you might be able to see that on camera, but certain areas are very reflective, but there are very subtle differences. Probably I should have put that chalk there, but I can see like the lighter grey starts to show up a bit around that area, and the quality of it still reflects very well, but this is a slight difference in the colour of the stone. So it's just about repeating that process, A to B, B to C, and then C to A. This is the larger one as well. Again, it's got a very good reflection at those angles. So just repeating the process a few times around, and once we get a good level, we'll go to a finer and finer abrasive, and again, because the finer abrasive is going to means that you're shaving off less and less each time, and doing more minute, more and more accuracy is coming in regards to the flatness. So yeah, if you use a really rough sandpaper, you get a really rough surface on wood. If you use a very fine sandpaper, you get a very smooth surface on there as well. So that's just repeating the process as well. So again, without modern machinery, without engineering dyes, without modern measuring equipment, without engineering dyes, without micro mesh filters to give you, highly refined abrasives. So most primitive and simple, homemade, and getting towards precision closer and closer. Okay, so just to go through that, the technique that I'm using, so I've just again sprayed it down with some water. Now from the old, as you're grinding, the old abrasive that becomes dry and sticks, well, that's still good, so I'm going to reuse that at this moment. Now it's probably not the most advisable thing, but it is. I put on way too much. So that's another thing. The abrasive doesn't go bad. The more you use it, the more it gets ground down into smaller particles, and so yeah, it doesn't go. It just rough stuff just becomes finer and finer. And just spread that out a bit. So yeah, as you're using coarse abrasive, it gets finer and finer, and then gets from good for cutting, it becomes good for polishing. And so these abrasives that I'm using now is the leftovers from earlier projects where I was cutting and drilling granite. And so if there's really rough, like big rocks, if you want to call it, or pebbles, but they become this finer and finer dust. And before I put this plate on top, I'm just going to moisten that up as well, because if it's either by oil or I'm using water, but if it's like too dry, it tends to stick. So you want to it's impossible for me to explain it, only by experience will you sort of start to get the idea of what the mix you need of water or oil in compared to sand. So it's about trying to keep things equal. There are a lot of there are videos out there where people talk about what's the best way to do this. They're more expert, and they be the ones to really consult on this. I can only say what's sort of been working for me. And so it's important to keep your strokes, but I always start with very small strokes where it's just a little bit over. I would count to 20, working like that. I would always mix it up, so I'd recommend that as well. But then once I'd done those, I would rotate the stone and do the same on that side. Then I would move the stone in this direction and work there. Now I'm using very rectangular blocks. When they, the best, easiest way would be to have a square or a circle. And plus I have this third stone over to the side here, which is much larger than both of these, so I have to take account for that. But again, I would do short strokes. Always keep, again, I usually just work by counting to 20, so 20 seconds. And then again, I would rotate that as well. So I'm always trying to equal out the flaws there in the stone. So just, again, I would count to 20, small strokes, rotate, count to 20, small strokes, and then just keep, and again, I would keep rotating it around the stone itself, and got stuck, and then do the same again. If I didn't rotate the stone, because I'm working from this direction, I tend to, more pressure is put at the bottom, like where it's closest to you. There's less pressure here and there's more pressure there. So that's another reason why to rotate it. Once I'd completed this cycle, and I wouldn't always do it in a row, but the basic is small strokes, do a whole circle, keep rotating both the stone underneath and rotating the stone on top, keep it equal. Then I would introduce larger strokes, and again I would count to 20 when I do this, but because I'm not, small strokes, you're doing quite a few, just in a second you get multiple. When you do the larger ones, you get less. So the stroke count is less, but the time spent doing it is the same. So you've always got to try to keep these things equal. Again, and then do the same and rotate. Now, because it's without a guide, you're not going to have it precisely there, so I also like try and move it a little bit side to side so that one edge is never hanging over too much, because that means that, for instance, this edge is slightly over. It means that that's not getting worked, as where all of this bottom edge isn't, so that's going to cause a difference. So as I'm doing that, I also sort of move side to side as I'm working that. Then I'll include these large strokes, and again they're going to it takes longer, so I would count to 20 to go 20-second periods, and I don't know if you can, I'll be quiet now, hopefully you can hear this. Okay, so you'll be able to hear different effects happening. So if there's a high spot, and especially, okay, so before I go on to that, now small strokes, medium and large. I do more of the smaller. Also by that I mean I would do these small strokes for 20 seconds 2 or 3 times for each time that I start to introduce the largest of those. And then within that cycle I would also do sweeping circular ones. What I've found is that one of the benefits of that is that I'll start to hear, so as this, let's see if I can hear it first. It's pretty good at the moment, but as you work further and floors and high spots pick up, but you'll hear a definite change in the sound, and that will also tell you, because as I'm moving around, and I might, when the stone is on this corner, I'll hear it. That's sort of again telling me that that needs to be worked a little bit more. It's hard to explain all of it. It's just something you have to really pick up from experience. But I watched the videos, read the articles by people who do this, and try to learn from experienced people as much as you can. But you can't write down on paper what you'll pick up from experience, trial and error. And the most important thing is, if you do it perfectly the first time, you're probably not going to learn anything, because it's the mistakes that you make that tell you why you went wrong. If you just get it right the first time and just repeat it, well, you know the method, but you don't really understand why it's working, and you won't. And if things go wrong, you won't pick them up. So again, it's always, as in life, it's the mistakes that teach you much more than what the success will. See, now I'll rotate this around and I'll do these sweeping strokes because that might pick up something. Okay, but no, not at this point, but the sound is pretty good. But yeah, it's just a matter of experience. So in brief, small strokes, I use a 20-second rule. I don't know if that's the best, that's just the way I like, I just count in my head to 20. Small strokes, then medium, and then large. Always rotating the stone on top and repeating, and also rotating the stone underneath so that I don't have a bias, so that each side is closest to me the same amount of times. That's the, okay, actually the camera's not going to pick it up, but also I can feel that it sticks a little bit more when I come up towards this top corner. And now let's see if you can hear this. Okay, so if I move over, I'll just let you hear it for a moment. Notice this sound? Let me just get that all equaled out again for a moment. I just want to distribute the mud, the abrasive. Okay, now maybe you can hear that. There's a slight change in there, and it's coming from this side, and either this bottom corner here. I think it's the bottom corner. Yes, it is here. I can hear it and I can feel it, that different sound. The sound changes when this area comes in contact. Okay, so these are the things, you'll start to feel it, you'll start to hear it, and it's just like those old craftsmen, they develop their skills, and people who are experienced in their trade, they can feel the difference between microns. It just becomes something that only can be done with experience. So you'll might have heard amongst the lost high technologists, oh, you can't feel this, you can't do this. It's just not true. Because firstly they haven't tried, and I'm a noob at this, and the amount of knowledge, skill, experience, even in this, only doing it for a few experiments, you just pick up the skills and the sensitivities. It's humans we are amazing creatures, and we can do amazing things. But it does take a bit of experience. Okay, so that's the basics of it. You've got to keep if I count your strokes, try and keep them equal. The small strokes, I think, let me get that back in screen, the small strokes are the best because that's when you have the most contact on there. You're always going to be coming off the edge a little bit. But then to help equalise things out, I use these medium and then the very large strokes as well. But the larger the stroke, the less I do in comparison to the small ones. And the least method that I use is this sweeping stroke, this sort of circular one. But I do try and keep that, because that's where you really will start to hear the differences, because different areas will make contact with different pieces of the plate, and that's the best way that I've found to pick up the differences, and if there are the flaws and the variations in the flatness. But I do that least of all, And so I don't know, suppose it's for every 20 seconds, actually like every 60 seconds of small strokes, I'll do 40 seconds approximately of medium strokes, and then 20 seconds of the large stroke, and then 10 seconds of these sweeping strokes, unless that's the general rule. But in case I might, discover a flaw, I feel this where it's making contact and changing the sound, then I'll use those strokes to equalize things out. That's the basic method of it. I'll put links in the descriptions to other people who do this much longer and have, of course, more experience and what their thoughts on these things are. And what else to be said? Nothing really else to be said for it. It's to get things relatively flat, very, very easy. Just rub two surfaces together, and then to get this fine detail work, you've got to develop your technique, keep things as equal as you can, vary things, always keep rotating, and most important, be really careful with your abrasive, because a few loose pieces of grit, of like sand getting in there, will do a lot of damage, and it takes a while to grind them out. So like a piece of beach sand, for instance, was to get in there, it would create big scratches. You wouldn't really see them, but you will start to notice them as you get more experienced. And then to grind that out with fine abrasive, it takes a lot of work. 10 seconds of contamination, might take 10 minutes of repair work to be done. So it's again about filtering out, keeping things clean as much as you can. And yeah, that's about all it is to be said. A to B, then B to C, then C to A, and just keep repeating over and over. So here we have the 3 plates. The 2 of the same size, but very rectangular rather than square or circular, which makes it a little bit more harder to get the flatness. And we have this 3rd larger plate. Now earlier I showed how so if you start with a coarser abrasive and then a finer abrasive, you'll see the differences in colour between the low and the high spots. This is almost all uniform across there. Now there is another way, so it might look to the eye at that level, but if I can get this up, when we get to a reflection, there are very subtle little differences in there, so I can see that, but it is very, very close to flat. This one has the same. Okay, maybe even the camera can pick it up. There's still a little bit of a light grey, a low area here. And then we have this stone, and it's a bit clumsy, heavy to lift up and angle it, but they all have this, well, essentially a mirror finish, perfect mirror finish at this angle, but eventually we'll get to the polish where it has a mirror image looking at it straight on. But we can test these plates. Now I can see slight flaws across the 3, but I made these, this is one of the 3 surface plates I made earlier. You might notice some mirror finish, but even, we can get to, well, there's a reflection, but the lighting's not very good, but because this has been highly polished as well, but we can use this to test. So actually let me just give this a, because there's a bit of a dust eruption from when I picked it up, and even a smaller bit of dust, grains of sand will affect it. I need to clean this one too. Just a very light clean with a, now, okay, it's floating. Go to the 3rd one, it's floating. So precision flatness is there. It could be better. It should float a bit more freely. Ooh, nearly went off the edge. There are a few spots I can even hear the sound where it is not floating, but very, very close to flatness. And then we have the third one, and it's not floating. So again, even though this one is super flat, even the reflection coming off it, you hard pressed to see a floor. But we're very, very close to using that Whitworth technique to get perfect flatness. And this is one way to test. This is all, without using any off-the-shelf store-bought materials. It's all handmade. And again, this one's not floating, so I'd spend another 15 minutes doing A to B, B to C, and then C to A, because if you're doing it correctly, you should have not one, not two, but 3 flat plates where each will float on top of one another.